fact, many of students in this class, they selected to do research about Russia, which was quite surprising to me. Russian-Korean gas relations, Russian-Korean energy relations. Many students especially those Korean students. Many students chose to do Russian energy, which means that Russian energy, they think that it's very important for Korean energy strategy, right? Even if the shale tsunami is hitting Korea, right? I guess that you all think that Russian energy still important for Korean energy strategy. Okay, so I think the goal of today's class, some of your students made an excellent point in this paper proposal that we need to, in understanding Russian energy, I think that first we need to understand the current Ukrainian crisis, Ukrainian-Russian gas crisis. Then I think clearly something going on between Russia and Europe, and the position of Ukraine is very pivotal between Russian and European energy. But I think one of the implications of the Ukrainian crisis, I think, is that has a lot of implications for Asian, Northeast Asian energy relations. So I think that the goal of today's class is first begin with, I think, the current Ukrainian crisis, the implication of that for Russian-European energy relations, which many of you will be writing about in your paper research paper. Then we'll shift to why the Ukrainian crisis has significant implications for Northeast Asian energy relations. Particularly, Russia is looking east because of these European changes. Then we'll look at Russian strategy in the Northeast Asian energy. And this textbook gives a good description of Russian energy strategy in Northeast Asia. It's good in the sense that this chapter gives not only about gas strategy, Russian gas strategy, but also talks a lot about ESPO. You might have read ESPO, East Siberian oil pipeline, right? Which is very important. Many people forgot about it, the importance of ESPO. ESPO linking East Siberian energy field, right? Oil and gas field, to the Pacific Ocean, right? So we need to go back a little bit because this ESPO debate put on hold for a while because of the shale revolution. But some things happened. Meanwhile, something happened regarding the ESPO because 2012, the second stage of ESPO opened, right? Many didn't know about it. The opening of ESPO, second stage of ESPO, which is very important. So what is the second stage of ESPO, right? How much oil? Is it oil or gas? ESPO is about oil, right? Russian oil exports. So how much more oil Russia is going to export to which country, right? This chapter gives a very good description about ESPO. Russian gas strategy and oil strategy. It's important to handle both, right, strategies. Because still, I think Russian gas exports, relatively revenues from Russian gas exports, much smaller than revenues from oil exports. So ESPO, very important for Russia. And China is important for Russia, right? Because Russia is losing revenues in the European continent, right? Looking east, and Russia is loosening up, okay, regarding, you know, Russia and China gas price negotiations. So he argues, this chapter argues, and there are many articles about it. 2013, because of U.S. shale revolution, Russia, China, they are bridging the gap, right? They are bridging the gap. Sort of, Russia is like meeting halfway, right? Yielding on gas price issues. Then Russia-China agreement, consensus on gas issues, maybe is about to come sooner or later. In May this year, the leaders of these two big countries will meet again, and many expect something big deal will come out of this May summit 2014. So we need to keep an eye on that. So Russian gas strategy, oil strategy in Northeast Asia. That's the focus of today's class, okay? And Northeast Asia, we have, you know, China, Japan, Korea, right? This chapter doesn't give details of, you know, this Russian, Korean, Russian, Chinese, Russian, Japanese, this different bilateral energy relations. This chapter doesn't give details of that. But it's important. Russia is dividing and ruling these three different countries in Northeast Asia to get the most, you know, out of the negotiations. So Russia is handling differently China, Japan, Korea. So we need to get into a little bit of how Russia handled differently. You know, China, Korea, Japan, right? And we have Russian-Korean pipeline, which is again delayed almost permanently, right? There are different options on the table, so we need to look into what are those options between Russia, Korea. Why is it important for Russia, Korea build this Korean pipeline? Is it really important, right? Does Russia really want to export natural gas and oil to Korea, right? How much to Korea? How much to China? How much to Japan, right? The best case for Russia is every country, Russia, China, Japan, every country wants to buy oil and gas from Russia. That's the best case scenario for Russia, right? So Russia is getting sort of the upper hand in handling differently these three Northeast Asian countries. So we need to get into some details of that. Then I think this chapter covers a lot of issues. Then this chapter talks a lot about Central Asia. Central Asia, what is U.S. strategy in Central Asia, right? And this explanation about ESPO and Central Asian, U.S. Central Asian strategy, and also I think, which is also very excellent in the sense that this chapter goes over Central Asian take, Central Asian perspectives, right? How Azerbaijan sees this, how Kazakhstan sees this, how Turkmenistan sees this, how Uzbekistan sees this. So this chapter covers the Central Asian local perspectives, right? Which is very important, right? And finally, I think this chapter covers, you know, different contending pipelines, which we covered a little bit last class, right? So there are different, right, contending pipelines, right, linking Middle East, Central Asia to Europe. There are many different pipelines, right? Some are Western, some are Russian, right? And even Western pipelines, they compete, right? Some Western pipelines lose to the same Western pipelines, right? So we cover these contending pipelines, the status of the current competition of different pipelines, which is important. So, you know, what I thought was that, you know, rather than me talking about all this, you know, like for instance, Nord Stream, I can sort of commission some students, you know, make a presentation on Nord Stream, then TANAP, okay, TANAP, then South Stream, which is very important, Russian pipeline, South Stream, Blue Stream. There's so many different pipelines, right, which has a lot of information. Each pipeline has a lot of information. But, you know, I'll just give you overviews on each pipeline. That's it. Now, I think this chapter begins with some of the changing supply situations, which is the background against all these, you know, shifts. I think this textbook gives several things as background for these big shifts. Number one, I think you know, U.S. is becoming much more self-sufficient. This is a big change, most important change. America is becoming much more self-sufficient. In American terms, this is independent, energy independent. America is becoming energy independent. This is a huge change, right, behind every other big changes. The second, U.S. gas demand is decreasing. This is another change. U.S. gas demand, right? While America is becoming independent energy-wise, then Europe is decreasing gas demand, right? This is important. And third, Asia, on the other hand, there's a huge, right, rise in oil and gas demand. If you look at the Ukrainian situation, I think the beginning story always coming from the U.S., right? The beginning is from the U.S. Then the first change is found in Europe, like Ukrainian crisis, right? But the ultimate destination is in Asia, right? So beginning in America, then you know, Europe, then final destination in Asia, because Asia is the final big market. And Russian LNG growth is still far distant future, distant story, right? Because Russia is constrained, right? In terms of pipeline exports, right? If you look at the Ukrainian situation. So the exit strategy for Russia is to develop LNG development, right? LNG exports. But for this to happen, you need more time, right? In order for Russia to export LNG, we need much more time. He's talking about 10 years, a decade. But even this is not enough, in my opinion, in order for Russia to export LNG. And Arctic, again, Arctic could be an exit strategy for Russia, but still, right? You know, in terms of cost and technology, I think still distant future. Even far. Much more far distant than LNG, right? So some projects, you know, underway, and before the shale revolution, Russia was coming closer to Arctic exports, right? But the shale is delaying Arctic development. And again, another thing that makes Russia in trouble is the EU, you know, energy market liberalization. The third energy package, right? The third energy package. You all know from Europe, right? What is the third energy package is about? What's the essence of third energy package? What is the EU is trying to achieve from this, the third energy package?
It's all about the diversification of the gas and oil supply from, like, to get rid of the Russian influence, gas influence.
Right, right, right. I mean, to break up Russian monopoly, right?
Yeah.
But how does that break up Russian monopoly, the third energy package, the EU policy? How does that break up Russian monopoly over exports? The third energy package. What's the essence of this? In European terminology, unbundling transportation and production, right? Unbundling. In other words, Gazprom currently is controlling both transportation and export, right? So EU legislation is now trying to break up this and separate this, right? Because they think that this gives monopoly to Russia, to Gazprom, right? So this is another thing that makes Russia difficult, right? The third energy package. So in general, I think the author thinks that the U.S. Rise as an energy independent country poses challenges for Russia. I think this is a big debate, right? To what extent? Currently, Russia, Putin, I think, thinks that this is not much of a threat, right? But over time, when America really begins to export LNG, natural gas, to both Europe and Asia, I think this will become a much more realistic story. So these are all sort of combined to comprise radical supply shifts, right? Changes. And if I want to add maybe one more, there are new suppliers, okay, than Russia and even America. There are Australian supplies, okay, Australian supply, right? The big new supply from Australia. And relatively big new supply from East Africa also, right? So supply from Australia, supply from East Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, right? That's another challenge for Russia, right? Anything you want to add to this in terms of supply shifts? As far as Russian, troubles are concerned, right? Sort of all these make troubles for Russia. This is the point, right? America becoming independent, right? Australia rising as a new supplier, East Africa rising as a new supplier, right? These are all make troubles for Russia, right? And this may be an opportunity for Russia, right? Rising oil and gas demand in Asia. This is a challenge for Russia. And because of this, Russia is looking east, right? Because of this, right? There's a limitation on LNG exports, right? We are going to discuss, how far Russian LNG development is advanced. We'll look into that, right? Currently, Russia is exporting LNG only from the island of Sakhalin, only from that, right? No other than the Sakhalin island. Okay? Okay, next. Then I think we need to cover some of the recent information about the Ukrainian crisis. If you read, there's so much information coming out of the media about the Ukrainian crisis. Very important, very interesting stories about Ukrainian crisis. I've come across several interesting newspaper articles that argue that there are several things that might happen because of the Ukrainian crisis, because things will be very different after the Ukrainian crisis. Things won't be the same after the Ukrainian crisis. Once the crisis happened, the things after this will be very different. That's kind of an attitude people have. Then how it will be different? There are so many interesting speculations. How Russian-American relations, Russian-European relations, Russian-Chinese, or Russian-Korean, Russian-Japanese, all these relations will be different according to media articles. According to one article that I read last night about Russian-European relations, is that Europeans, they might increase defense spending because of this. I don't know how you think of this. European will increase defense spending, and there's so many interesting scenarios, and maybe NATO will be much more substantial in terms of responsibilities. And I think at the end of the day, Russia has more things to lose than win. That's kind of many newspaper articles trying to describe. Right. This is kind of a sort of an attitude, kind of questions people asking how the Ukrainian crisis is changing the entire world. But some basic information we need. Like for instance, we all know about this, right? Russian supplies 30%, right? Oil 35%, right? European dependence on Russia, natural gas 30%, oil 35%, and half of these, right, transited through Ukraine, right? This is how much Ukraine is important, right? Half these, as a transit country, pass Ukraine. From the Russian perspective, 90% of Russian natural gas, 90% of Russian natural gas, 80% of oil go to EU. Right? So dependence is mutual. Right? Europeans think that they are strategically dependent on Russia. Russia also thinks that, right? Russia is strategically dependent on the EU market. Right? So both are trying to diversify. Right? EU on one hand and Russia on the other. They don't like dependence. Right? Both of them don't like dependence. I think if you look at the data, the number itself, Russia is much more vulnerable than EU, right? Because dependence of Russia is much higher than EU, right? And Ukraine itself is highly dependent on Russian energy. 40%, Ukraine is 40% dependent on Russian natural gas. Ukraine is 40% dependent on natural gas, right? Let me correct. 40% depend on natural gas, right? And natural gas, half comes from Russia, right? The Crimean crisis, before this happened, Ukraine was getting a discount, 30% discount, right? But after the crisis, Russia is asking for, right, the entire amount without discount, which amounts to $2 billion, right? And the reason why Russia gave this discount was that Ukraine is geopolitically so important for Russia. Geopolitically important, meaning that without Ukraine, I think Russia, as a integral identity, Russia loses the identity without Ukraine, right? That's one. Second, Russia is trying to build an empire, Soviet-style empire, which is, they call it Eurasian Union. And from several years ago, Russia is building this Eurasian Union, right, into which they integrate Kazakhstan, Belarus, Russia clearly, then Ukraine, right? So Russia is trying to invite Ukraine, right, into this Eurasian Union against the EU, right? So by giving this discount to Ukraine, Russia is trying to invite Ukraine into this Eurasian Union, rejecting EU proposals, right? Ukraine is also heavily dependent on Russian oil. And this, gas and oil, these two different energy items, most people's attention was directed to natural gas, right? But this textbook sort of emphasizes the importance of oil, right? In terms of Russian strategy, in terms of American strategy. After the Ukrainian crisis occurred, one of the strategies of the United States is to put U.S. strategic petroleum reserve. U.S. has a lot of oil, stockpile of enormous amount of oil, to decrease international oil price. America is considering putting a lot of oil into the international oil market so that the prices go down, right? Because Russian revenue from natural gas relatively smaller than revenues from oil, right? So natural gas sanctions is not enough, right, to put pressure on Russia. So Russian, oil strategy and natural gas strategy, I think we need to separate it. But this textbook argues from the European perspective, right, which is sad to say, in the short term, there is no substitute for Russian energy imports. Today, I think a lot of Europeans, you're debating this, right? What's the substitute for Russian energy exports? And one of the debate in Europe today is going in the direction of, again, developing renewable energy, more investment into renewable. That's another direction. And maybe shale gas, that's another direction. In terms of getting around this Russian, right? And some Eastern European countries, right? Some Eastern European countries, because Eastern Europeans are much more dependent on Russia, some Eastern European countries, asking America to speed up LNG exports. Right? Some countries in Eastern Europe, they're asking America to speed up LNG export. But American LNG exports won't be available until either late 15 or early 16. Right? So this is not a short-term solution either. Right? U.S. shale gas export is not a short-term solution either. Like I said, the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, right? America has 695 million barrels of crude oil, right? Which is about 90 days of 6 million barrels of oil per day, right? Russia exports about 7 million barrels per day. So U.S. is considering this. So at this rate, America could supply about 4 million barrels per day for 90 days. So now Europeans are debating, right, ways in which they can, diversify their energy supplies. Maybe one way, I think one of the interesting development is that if you look at, we discussed the southern gas corridor, right? Linking as a diversified strategy, linking Central Asian, Middle Eastern energy to European continent, right? But always this southern gas corridor was to bypass Iran, right? But Iran is now, after the U.S.-Iranian deal, Iran is now is about to export maybe some natural gas and oil. So Iran may be an option for diversification. Now, I think the big point, let's shift to this point. One of the implications of all these Ukrainian, Russian, European energy conflicts and all that is that the rise of China as a future energy market. So from Russian perspective, China could be a substitute for possible future European market losses. So tension between Russia and European countries over crisis, over Crimea could change in general the dynamics of global energy flows, both oil and gas. Let's look at the changing dynamics in Northeast Asia, which is the focus of today's class. This Russian energy strategy toward Northeast Asia was first announced in the Russian Energy Strategy 2030, which was announced November 2009. According to this blueprint, Russia is trying to diversify exports to Asia in terms of oil exports from 6% to 25%, okay, as of 2009. In terms of natural gas exports from 0 to 20%. Okay. This was already announced November 2009. And oil must be supplied to China, Japan, Korea, and also the United States through this new pipeline called ESPO. ESPO is a about 4,000 kilometer long pipeline linking East Siberia to the Pacific port, okay, the Pacific port, from which they can ship it to China, Japan, Korea, and many other countries, including the United States. It's interesting, America is second largest importer from this pipeline. And because of shale revolution, right, US import from this ESPO will decrease, right? Not yet, but will decrease. So to make up for this US loss, Russia is trying to increase exports to China, right? So December 2010, 0.3 million barrels per day. Let's see how big this is and where, right? Because ESPO is a long pipeline. It's 2 sections, stage 1, stage 2, right? Then there's a branch pipeline down to China, right? So where is that branch pipeline? Let's look at the map. The natural gas supply is through LNG. Okay, natural gas supply is through LNG, which is called, the project is called Sakhalin-2. I'll show you where that is. And this, the first natural gas export project for Russia. This is Sakhalin, second. Okay, out of the island of Sakhalin. It began April 2009. The importance of this Russian LNG export, many forget about this, the importance of this. Right? So in terms of oil exports, ESPO. In terms of LNG exports, Sakhalin. Okay? So what you have to do now is, some you wrote in your research paper proposal. We need to figure out, after the shale revolution, there's so many things happened since then, right? The shale revolution, then Ukrainian crisis again, right? It's changing all the dynamics. So after the Ukrainian crisis, after the shale revolution, what is going on about these ESPO or about this Sakhalin LNG project? What is going on? Here we need to go back and see new changes. That's what you should do in your paper. If you write about Russia, if you write about Northeast Asian, energy, you need to do this somehow. Some of you say you are going to do this, right? This is very important. Very important, and so many changes happening now, especially between Russia and China. Right, this is correct. Right, this is correct. Russian gas supply currently is only through LNG. Right? So far, nothing through PNG. Right? Nothing. It's just delaying. It's being delayed because of pricing problems. Right? Russia, China, they have pricing problem. That's the biggest problem. So nothing is provided. No Russian gas is supplied through PNG. So this is a big difference between Europe and Asia. Europe, PNG is 70 or 80% of natural gas supply, right? Only 20, 30% LNG supply. But here, exactly the opposite. And Russian argument. They will make a big breakthrough in this sooner or later. A lot of Russians are talking about this. maybe even Chinese. If you read some newspaper articles, some big breakthrough is about to happen about Russia-China natural gas issues. Then the U.S. shale strategy result in a big failure. That's what Russians are talking about if you read newspapers. So we have to closely watch what will happen in the May Russian-China summit. Right? So as of 2011, how much 3 Northeast Asian countries rely on Russian oil? Japan 4%, China 8%, Korea 6%. In terms of natural gas, right? Because there is no PNG, LNG, Japan 9%, but it's an increase over 4% in 2009. China still small, 0.5 BCM. Korea again big, jump over 4% 2009. So if you look at this, Russia is expanding its exports to this region, despite many problems. So now I think it's time to go back and check what is going on now between Russia and these three NE countries and potential future prospects. I show you a map. These are all Koreans, but let me translate this for you. This is Russian pipeline routes. Okay, pipeline routes. This is East Siberia. East Siberia. This is Irkutsk. Russia has several different natural gas production center. One is at Irkutsk, Krasnoyarsk natural gas production center, and Yakutsk. So these are 3 big production center, natural gas production center. And Russia is thinking how they produce here, then link it and ship it to the final consumers here. Right? Consumers are here, China, Japan, Korea. And they bring it here. First, Khabarovsk. This is Khabarovsk. Right? This is Khabarovsk. Sakhalin, they bring it also onto the land and make a link between here. Right? And Vladivostok is important. Vladivostok. Vladivostok is the storehouse for natural gas. Right? So everything collects here. These are collection points in terms of exporting these different countries. Right? So pipeline is now completely built here. These are all completely built. Right? And the only thing that Russia was trying to build since 2011 was link it to Korean territory. Vladivostok, but problem here, from Vladivostok down to Korea, there are 2 ways of linking it to Korea. One is undersea pipeline. So Vladivostok, then out to the sea, East Sea, then to Korea. In other words, this is like a get around North Korea, right? Because North Korea is a problematic. So to get around North Korea, build undersea pipeline. This is option 1. Option 2
through North Korea. This way. This is option 2. And option 2 was becoming much more realistic under Lee Myung-bak President Lee Myung-bak. Since 2011 up to 2012, there was a meeting, summit meeting between Russian president, North Korean leader at that time, 2011, right? Then again, Russian president, Korean president, right? And they were discussing this line instead of this, right? It was almost like a coming true, 2011, 2012. Then currently, what's the current status of this? You know what's happening in North Korea, right? North Korea since then, over the entire year of 2012, North Korea was becoming, first I think Kim Jong-il died. That's a big factor. Kim Jong-il died, then his son succeeded, and his son might have succeeded this pipeline project, but somehow it's not clear. I mean, what sort of things Kim Jong-il left for his son about this energy project. But after Kim Jong-un took over, you know, political situation, internal situation in North Korea, you know, so chaotic. Then U.S. shale exports, right? Discussion began. So this pipeline almost dumped, is permanently delayed. And I show you then how oil pipeline, this is Korean. You know, if you read this, right? The company Sakhalin Energy and coal gas 1.5 million ton, Japan 6.2 million ton, America 1.6 million ton from Sakhalin to natural gas. Again, this same thing. Sakhalin to LNG sales. Right? Japan combined to purchase 6.2 million. Coal gas 1.5. Right? Right. Look at this. From Sakhalin 2, Japan buys the most LNG. Right? Then Korea, Taiwan, India, China, Kuwait. This is oil pipeline. According to this textbook, page 189. 12 from the bottom. Page 189, 12 from the bottom. I think he's right. This is a good point. Russia is more successful in diversifying to Asian market with oil than natural gas. So Russian oil strategy was much more successful than natural gas strategy as far as Asian market is concerned. So this shows why that is the case. So the point, the previous slides, the main point about the previous several slides about Russian natural gas exports, there are some natural gas coming and going, right? Korea, Japan, China, they buy some natural gas from Russia, LNG, right? But overall, that Russian natural gas exports to Russia, highly limited, right? Limited. But oil, much more diversified, much more successful because of this pipeline, because of this long pipeline linking East Siberia to the Pacific market, Pacific port. This is final destination. The port is called, here, the natural gas collection point was Vladivostok, right below this oil port. Oil port is called Kozmino. She knows well. Kozmino, the port of Kozmino. This is oil port, oil collection point, right above Vladivostok. So pipeline reaches here. And this is SPO 1. SPO 1 was completed December 2010. And this is SPO 2. SPO 2 was completed December 2012. Right? Many newspapers didn't report enough about the opening of this. Right? Now, SPO 1 reaches Skovorodino here, right? Skovorod. This is pipeline. Before SPO 2 open, Russia provides 600,000 barrels of oil here. Okay? Then move it, 600,000, move it here, reach here. Then 300,000 goes down to China, Daqing. This is China branch pipeline. So 300,000 coming down. The rest of 300,000, move it, because this is not a pipeline before December 2012. Railroad. Move it through railroad here. So 300,000 moved by railroad here until December 2012. And 300,000 distributed to different, right, consumers. And number one buyer of this Russian oil through Kozmino was Japan. Right? Second buyer, according to this textbook, America was buying a lot of oil from Russia, from here, which is right. Which is right. But after the shale revolution, America no longer buys. It is expected not to buy all this Russian oil. So this remaining oil must be provided to China. Which is right. Which is again right. So Russia-China oil relation, unlike Russian-China gas relation, was smoothly, right, conducted, very good relations. And all this possible because of Chinese loans. Right? China lended money to Russia, $25 billion. Right? CNPC gave money to Russian oil company, right? $25 billion. There was discussion about, and this contract, 30-year contract, long-term contract, 25 billion, 30-year, 300,000 barrel for 30 years. So if you calculate, you can calculate it, right? How much per barrel, how many dollars per barrel. So there was discussion internally in China whether or not they were, it was a good deal or expensive deal. There was discussion on both sides. Internally Russians were debating, Chinese were debating, right? And in terms of competition from China and Japan, right? Who won? There was competition. Russia and China, they were competing to get this Russian oil from Taishet, East Siberia. And who won this? You know, there were nasty kind of struggles between Russia and, Japan and China to monopolize this Russian oil. But both win, right? Because they both got Russian oil anyway, right? Right. And internally, Russians were debating, again, debating whether to give it to Japan through the Pacific port or give it to China, which is better. That's Russian debate, right? Before they built this, both directions, they were debating whether to give it to China or whether to give it to Japan. Russians were debating that. That debate went on 2004, 2005. I remember those years. Those years were very like a competitive energy struggles between China, Japan. Korea was also involved in that. Korea was also involved in that. That's when Korean conglomerate Hanbo was sort of got involved in this East Siberian oil project. Hanbo initially was very was having a winning strategy. Hanbo, the best deal Hanbo was getting, but at the end Hanbo went bankrupt, and Japan, China got it instead. So this is ESPO. Right? This is ESPO. And Korean pipeline later joined. I think we need to stop here. Right. Then can we finish up like U.S. strategy in Central Asia, which is important, right? Like a beginning page 191. Okay, Wednesday, I'll begin with page 191 and finish up the remaining pages. Then next Monday, Arctic energy. Arctic is a huge chapter. Huge chapter. Okay, see you on Wednesday.